Welcome, everyone. I'm Scott Hill from FlightClubICT.com, and we are here for another live review session on Google Hangouts. I'm here with my co-host today, Stephen. Stephen, introduce yourself.
Hey, Stephen here. I'm your brother in plaid tonight, it looks like. I got the Christmas tree over my shoulder still. We're a couple days removed from Christmas, but certainly still in the holiday spirit and excited to try some Old Forester stuff tonight.
Yeah. That's exactly why we're here to try the latest release. Maybe what is becoming one of the biggest surprise releases or most surprise enjoyment releases from the fall winter of 2018. It's the Old Forester 1910. Before we get into that, Stephen, why don't we throw it back over to you and give us a little bit brief background on Old Forester.
Sure. So from like a, I don't know, 30,000 foot view perspective, Old Forester is one of the companies owned by Brown Forman. Brown Forman owns Woodford Reserve, Old Forester, and Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels really set aside, it's his own thing. It's in Tennessee. They do the whole charcoal filtering thing. They don't even want to be called bourbon necessarily. Woodford Reserve and Old Forester have some similarity, but really Old Forester more recently has begun to, I don't know if you'd say just ramp up the creativity or try to, roll out something new. But they've also gotten kind of in touch with their roots a little bit. So I'll kind of pass it back to you to talk about what they've done with both releasing their Whiskey Row series, but then also harking back to something they did long ago.
Yeah. So you're exactly right. They kind of set on their 86 proof and their signature 100 proof for quite some time without a lot of innovation. In 2014, they launched this Whiskey Row series, and the idea of the Whiskey Row series is they're trying to tell the story of Old Forester from its beginning days, kind of bring it up to the current. They started with the 1870 release, which was I believe, 90 proof release. And it was sort of a combination of barrels from three different rick houses, trying to emulate a little bit of how Brown Forman started as a company. They were a non-distillery producer at the time, producing 90 proof bourbon from three different sourced distilleries, blending them together to make a product. So that's where 1870 came from, 1870 being the start of Old Forester. They then moved into, which is what I have here, the Old Forester 1897 Bottled and Bond. 1897 is a famous year from when the Bottled and Bond Act was finalized. This is 100 proof, obviously Bottled and Bond. Again, Old Forester had the signature 100 proof line, but they didn't have a Bottled and Bond line. The signature is a blend of multiple years. This is a true Bottled and Bond. With me so far?
I'm tracking with you.
All right. So then in 2017, Old Forester really hit a home run with the 1920. This was very well received last year. Was many people's surprise release of 2017. This is the Prohibition style from 1920. 1920 is the year Prohibition started. This is a 115 proof Old Forester release, one of the highest proof Old Forester products that was on the market. Very, very well received. Then later in 2018, getting a little bit outside the Whiskey Row series, but maybe there's a connection, at least as it relates to us. Old Forester released this 95 proof Statesman. Stephen, tell us a little. You may know a little bit about this one. What do you know about this one?
So the Statesman was one. It was interesting. So Old Forester had trotted out this Whiskey Row series, and it really been received well. And so after 1920 came out, I think people were sort of anticipating, wow, what are they going to do next? Because it's almost been building towards a climax. So Statesman comes out, and everyone's like, it's called Statesman. I don't understand the Whiskey Row deal. It had nothing to do with Whiskey Row. Statesman came out and was used as part of the marketing effort for a movie called The Kingsman, I think. It was even the sequel to this movie that had like Colin Firth, and it had to do with I don't know. It was almost like a spy action movie thing, kind of off the wall. And the last company that you would have thought in the whiskey business to pair with that would have been Old Forester. I mean, it had such a British influence, this movie did. And no, they don't lean towards Scotch. Instead, they go to the States, and Old Forester is the one that team up. And so kind of conspiracy theories emerged from that. People thought, well, maybe the fourth release in the Whiskey Row series ended up kind of being a dud. And Old Forester thought, well, what do we do with this? And an opportunity fell in their lap. And what would have been the fourth release in the Whiskey Row series became instead Statesman. But
that was our opinion.
Yeah, and yeah, we even posted on hypothecating that. Then what happened was Old Forester got the label approval for what we're about to try, which is the 1910. Whether it puts to rest the conspiracy theories or whether Old Forester just kind of pivoted to something else entirely, we will never really know for sure. We did reach out to Old Forester to ask and didn't really get confirmation one way or another. But this year, another Whiskey Row series bottle came out, and it's called 1910 Old Fine Whiskey.
So I want to give a little bit of a shout out to Bourbon Pursuit. They had a podcast in the last month and a half, interviewing Jackie Zykin from Old Forester. She's the master taster for Old Forester, and she kind of broke down and introduced this 1910 product sort of to the world. 1910, Old Forester occupied a building that they've now moved back into on Whiskey Row in Louisville. Is that right? Yeah, I think so. I think that's right. Anyway, so 1910, they're sitting in this building producing whiskey. This is where they had a bottling line, apparently, and there was a fire somewhere near the building, outside the building, which caused them to cease operations for a period of time. They had taken bottled and bond 100 proof whiskey, had proofed it down to the 100 proof, and were ready to bottle it. Were forced to kind of get out of the building and couldn't bottle for a period of time. So they had to figure out what to do with this 100 proof whiskey. And what they did is they found some new charred barrels and bottled the 100 proof whiskey in a secondary barrel, a new charred oak barrel. And when that product was released, they didn't do it under the Old Forester name. They did it under this Old Fine whiskey name. So now, today, as they've now reoccupied this building, have done their grand opening, that's when they decided to release this 1910. What I know about this 1910 is they've kind of followed that same procedure. They take a bottled and bond style whiskey, at least 100 proof. They won't say it's bottled and bond, but they said it's proof down to 100 proof, and then they take it and they put it into a new charred barrel. Now these aren't just like a normal Old Forester charred barrel. Old Forester doesn't follow sort of this number 2, number 3, number 4 charring scheme. But what they say is a normal Old Forester barrel is charred for 22 seconds. This is charred apparently for like 55 seconds, to the point where barrel integrity is risked. Like, this is as far as they can go with charring this thing. So they put this back in there, and they say they age it for an additional 6 to 9 months. So after that, they take it out, they bottle it. It is proofed down to 93 proof. Part of it, why they're not at 100, and part of why they've gone down, is because they do lose a little proof in the barrels on that secondary barreling. So this is what's been presented to us, is this 93 proof 1910 Old Fine whiskey. So we're going to try it.
And let's pause for a second. We have had a tasting event. It was last year, where we did taste each of the Whiskey Row series to date at that time. So it was the 1897 small batch, the bottled and bond, and then the 1920. And then we also tried an old President's Choice from way back in the 50s that Old Forester recently has released as a distillery only product, this President's Choice. So if you want to check that out, go to flightclubict.com, go to our tasting events tab after you go to the blog, and you can search in there to find our review of the Whiskey Row series of at least the first 3. We have also posted a review of the Statesman that talks a little bit about the background. So separately, if you look at our reviews or just look under the Brown Forester distillery page on our blog, you can go find that as well. But yeah, tonight what we're going to do is try the 1910, and for some context, I guess, we're going to try it alongside the Statesman. Last thing, I know that I'm distracting us here, but what I wanted to look at was, for this 1910, really one of the things that Old Forester was trying to do was say, look, we're gonna twice barrel it. So we're gonna barrel it, and then we're gonna barrel it a second time in a barrel that they say was charred to the point where it's nearly incinerated. And they said it was charred for how many seconds, you said?
55 seconds compared to a normal 22, so almost 3 times as long.
Okay. So they say it was nearly incinerated. They really give the impression that charring it for 55 seconds is extreme. It's unusual. I'm looking at right now, Buffalo Trace's Antique Collection. They always have these fact sheets, and it'll give all the information for the different Antique Collection bottles. George T. Stagg, 2018, the barrel, New White Oak. It says they use their number 4 char. The number 4 char for Buffalo Trace is 55 seconds. So for Old Forester to say or give the indication that could be interpreted that, oh, this is on the extreme end, it's not like it hasn't been done before. I think that what this means is for Old Forester, that might be a lot. But it's not that this is so unusual that no one else has done it for that long. Even Buffalo Trace has, their number 4 char is going to be for 55 seconds. And that's something that's going to be for a barrel that they want to hold George T. Stagg in for 15 years. So it's hardly, on the point of being on the brink of being incinerated. So I thought I should point that out before we get too far into thinking that they really just obliterated this barrel before they put something in it and it could only hold it for so long. Hardly. I mean, 55 seconds, a barrel can hold whiskey for at least 15 years, as Buffalo Trace could tell you.
Interesting note for sure on that. So, all right. So we'll start with the 1910. We can kind of come back a little bit later to the Statesman, see how it might compare. I think we've done a thorough review on the Statesman, so we don't need to maybe go into that level of detail, but you're right, for some context maybe.
Now I'll say that for Old Forester products, what I usually get is a lot of banana and a lot of metallic notes. And when I say metallic notes, I'm usually meaning more like if you were to smell like silver coins. Or even imagine like what that would taste like, that kind of metal. But on the nose on this, I certainly get the banana, but it's more like a banana cream or banana custard, like a banana cream pie. I'm not quite getting the heavy metallic notes that I've gotten with some other Old Forester stuff.
Yeah, it's not just the overripe banana. It's not the banana bread. You're right. It's more of that kind of custardy note with some vanilla, some caramel there definitely as well. I get some char from the barrel in there with a little bit of kind of dustiness to it.
And do you get a little bit with that char? To me, it's a little bit of like some charred marshmallow, I could say.
Yeah. There's some charred or burnt, over toasted marshmallow in there. There's some sweetness behind it, and I'm not sure if that's a kind of a marshmallow sweetness, a kind of a burnt sugar sweetness, or even beyond that, almost like a kind of a cake frosting sweetness.
Yeah, I keep coming back to banana cream pie because it's not a sweetness that I would necessarily get from fruit. It's also not just a pure caramel sweetness either.
There is, you mentioned metallic. Sometimes I associate metallic notes or medicinal notes as something that is more in the nature of an older, dusty type bourbon. I think this flirts a little bit on the nose with some of those older style notes, either metallic, maybe almost medicinal. And I think it's mainly the oak that I'm getting, but I start getting kind of a hint of those older whiskey notes on this.
Yeah, and for me, one of the primary older whiskey notes that I'll get on the nose is butterscotch, which is I'm not getting here.
Right.
But that must mixed in with the sweetness. And I'm still, the best I can do is identify it as kind of that marshmallowy or banana cream pie sweetness. I mean, it is all over the place on this one. If you're going to try to peel back the layers on this, that's one where you just keep peeling away at it, and you're getting it over and over again.
Maybe let's keep tasting. We'll come back to some scores since we're only scoring one. But it's an enjoyable nose to me.
It is an enjoyable nose, and especially compared to some other Old Forester products like the 86 or the Signature, or even the small batch in the Whiskey Row series. I think this is a nice inviting nose.
I will say that I'm not typically a fan of twice barreled bourbons. Oftentimes, what I get, especially on the nose, on the second barreling, is all those new oak kind of flavors that you really want to age out, but they stick it back in there, and they may leave it in that barrel for a couple months, and you get some of those sort of new oak, young oak, almost tastes craft kind of flavors. I don't get any of that craft flavor on this nose.
Yeah, and nor does oak dominate the experience. Earlier we mentioned Woodford, and so Woodford has, they're double oaked, and I think they even have like a double oaked or something like that. This is not near that level of oak and char that Woodford gives off for those bottles. This is creamier, sweeter, more inviting. And so it's, Brown Forman is kind of added again with this double oak or double barreled thing now with Old Forester, but I like Old Forester's version so far a lot better than Woodford's.
Yeah, maybe a hint of nuttiness to this nose as well. Good nose. Yeah, good nose.
Maybe some pecans. I mean, there's almost a little bit of, pecan pie you could pick up there. Yeah, it is a good nose.
I've gone in for a taste, and a lot of complexity as well on the palate. I get some initial caramel flavors, light, maybe caramel to butterscotch kind of flavors. And then for me, it really transitions to kind of an icing or a frosting kind of note. We're just coming off Christmas. I've had too many Christmas cookies as of late, but I'm really getting that sort of that icing frosting note sweetness on this.
And you totally get that on the back end of this. Yeah, the front end of this, I think you said butterscotch, and while I didn't get on the nose, I do give a little bit on the palate. I get some of that kind of pecan pie or candied pecan flavor in there at the beginning. But yeah, the palate then starts to transition almost into like a frosted sugar cookie, where it gets lighter, it gets sweeter towards the back end of the palate.
And that sweetness, it kind of carries through to the finish. I get a little more of those charred notes on the finish as well. And maybe a little bit of that banana is coming back on the tail end of the finish, kind of reminding me that this is still an Old Forester product. But it maybe a little bit of metallic there on the finish. I'm kind of having trouble placing that note, but it's almost like I've got a nickel in my mouth kind of flavor there on the end.
The texture of it, after nosing, you expect to get a kind of a creamy, rich texture, and I think you get a little bit of that on the front end of the palate, but then it starts to transition into somewhat creamy, but certainly not as rich. It doesn't transition so far into what we've had before. I think we had it with like a Henry McKenna 10-year bottled and bond bottle, where it was like a stinging sweetness like you get from really highly processed white sugar. This doesn't go there, even with that kind of vanilla frosting part of the palate. And then on the finish, it definitely dries out. It's not tannic, but it definitely dries out, and you get that char like you might get if you just bit into a charred marshmallow, to where it doesn't dry you out completely, but it is a drier transition from the palate to the finish.
For 93 proof, I get a little bit of astringency on this, a little bit of kind of mouth tingling astringency. And then on the palate, I'm left with a little bit of an unusual kind of a mouth coating that I kind of further associate with kind of that, buttercream frosting or something that just kind of coats your mouth and just stays there. It's not quite oily. It's not quite waxy. Just kind of coats your mouth.
Yeah, I think that's spot on with a buttercream frosting kind of feel. No, the finish does linger. It doesn't dry out to the point where then it just kind of stops abruptly. It does continue, and so it is a nice finish that rounds out the experience. Some of my overall impressions, just to take it more comprehensively, is I do still get a lot of the banana on this, but it is that kind of buttercream frosting that's mixed in. And for a 93 proof bourbon, this does bring a lot of flavor. It's not thin by any means.
No, not thin at all. I'm getting a little bit of fruit on the tail end of the palate finish, like kind of a cobbler kind of note, which adds some complexity to this. I really like this. I kind of mentioned on the nose that I got some of those notes that reminded me of an older bourbon. I think I get those again on the finish. I think with both of those, I think this is one of those. Let me just. I think this is much different than about 99% of what's on the market today. It just has a different feel to it. It's not what I'm used to in an everyday bourbon. We're going to maybe go back to the Kingsman here in a second. Kingsman's more in line of what I'm kind of used to. This isn't kind of what I'm used to. This feels different. This feels older. This feels like a different style of whiskey altogether. Yeah.
I like that it does bring something different to the Whiskey Row series. And it's interesting. So I think that what Old Forester said was every barrel that they pull is at least 4 years old. So they wouldn't say this is necessarily older than that, but there were some hints that it was closer to 6 years. And then it rests in that second barrel for 6 to 9 months. And I think that was just long enough to pick up on some of the flavors you can get extracted from that second barrel without just taking on oak and more oak and only oak. And so sometimes these like double oaked or double barrel kind of things can seem gimmicky. Here, I think it actually it enhanced it enough to offer something unique, and not at the expense of just, hey, we can market this as something else and kind of add it to the lineup.
How would you score this?
Sometimes what I do when we'll do our scores, so we do from 1 to 5. 1 is unsatisfied, and then 3 is satisfied, and then 5 is very satisfied. And so on that spectrum, I try to think first, what do I like the best between the nose, the palate, and the finish? On this one, it's really close across the board. This is a consistent dram to me, from the nose to the finish. It is. You're really nitpicking if you try to find your favorite part. I think I like the nose and the palate a little bit more than the finish. And then if I have to choose between the nose and the palate, I think I'd choose the palate. And so I think I end up as a, I don't know if the scores will necessarily differ really. I think I'm a 3.5, 3.5, 3 is what I'd say.
I'm probably a 3.5, 3.5, 3.5. I find the finish interesting. Maybe it could be improved a little bit, but I agree that it's a very consistent experience from start to finish. It's one that I'm more than satisfied with as it goes, nose, palate, and finish. And you know, each time I try it, I'm ready to go back for another, you know, another sip. It's good stuff. I'm right there. 3.5, 3.5, 3 or 3.5. I'm good with that.
And so let's talk a little bit about value next. This I know right now I've seen for about 55 here locally. I know that there's been some talk about how there's a scarcity element here for towards the end of the year, and that Old Forester is saying, whoa, we sold way more of this than we thought we would upon its initial release. You have to wait till June to get some more. And perhaps there's some gamesmanship there. I don't know if there is. If anything, I would just tip my hat and say, well done. This is a business after all. But I think that the price is going to stay the same. And so this being 55, for context sake, this being 55, let's just compare it to the other Whiskey Row members. 1920 is going to be more like 59, 60, maybe even towards 65. It is a higher proof after all. The bottled and bond, I think, is 50. And I think the small batch, if I remember right, was between 45 and 50 also. Did you see it as anything other than that?
No, that's about right. I've seen a little bit more price variance in the 1870 and the 1897. I've seen those as low as 40 for the 1870 and probably the 45 for the 1897. And even the 1920 I've seen at 52. There is some price variation on these. This one is probably priced just a little bit lower than the 1920, but not by much.
So I think that, you know, value-wise, this is, you know, it's part of this kind of limited run that Old Forester's doing, this Whiskey Row series. You don't have an age statement attached to it, but it does have the twice-barreled element there. It's 93 proof, so you're not getting a big kind of proof per dollar value there that you might with the 1920. But stepping back, I think this delivers a better value than the small batch and even the bottle and bonds. I think I like this a little bit better than the bottle and bond, even at a slightly lower proof. And sitting pretty close to $50. I'm still bouncing between a 3 and a 3.5. You know, that doesn't give me any sticker shock. I think that's probably about right.
Yeah, given my comments earlier about that, I feel that this tastes different than most of what I can find on the market today. I feel much better about spending $50, $55 than if it was something like we're going to get to in a minute. The Statesman, which is also in that $50 range, is a good product, but it feels much like everything else I've got back there in my cabinet. So I'm not as thrilled with that one as I am with this one for about the same price.
And let's go to another Brown-Forman product, but different brand. So Woodford's Double Oaked is going to be at least 55. It might be a little bit more, and we don't like that nearly as much. And so, yeah, if you're going to compare it to that, that definitely helps. And so I'd be willing to put the 1910 at a 3.5.
Yep. I will say that from a value perspective, we'll cover this on the overall perspective as well. I'm not disappointed that it's 93 proof. It feels right.
Yeah, I can't say that it could use a little bit more, like we've experienced with like Basil Hayden, for example. Um, and I don't think lowering it would help either. In 93 proof, if you just did this blind and you had to guess what the proof of this was, I think a lot of people would guess higher than 93, because there's some 90 to 93 proof bourbons out there that taste just, they're pretty thin, and they feel watered down too. And this doesn't have that, which is nice. So it doesn't need to be 100 or more to be good. 93 suits it, it seems like.
On an overall scale, where would you put this overall?
I mean, we've been basically 3.5 across the board, and so I think I'd stick with that. I mean, I'm just a little bit more than satisfied with this.
I'm a 3.5 as well. I think that's right where it falls, but I think this tells a little bit about how much I actually enjoy this. This is a pretty new bottle of 1910. It's about half gone. This has been out on the market for a month. This is 1920. I love 1920, and I don't find that I go back to it as often as maybe I would like. I just find this 1910 to be different. It's not a four. It's not. I'm not just absolutely crazy about it, but it's something different that I find that I keep going back to. And from that perspective, 3.5 is great, but I think Old Forester hit a home run with this one. I think it's great.
And I'm not going to get on a soapbox here, but let's just also take a moment and say, I think there has been some discussion in the larger bourbon community about, if something's not barrel proof, it's not worth it. If it's not 120 proof or more, don't waste my time. Bourbons at between 90 and 95 proof have their place. And say I don't want to have the internal debate of, do I add water or ice to this because it is just going to blow up my palate with whatever I've just had or might have next. I want something where I can relax. It's very approachable. It doesn't limit my options for what I have after this, food wise or drink wise. And that's where having just, a little bit of bourbon that's at 93 proof, you can kind of go anywhere from there. And for example, like over the holidays where, you're just sitting around with friends or family and you just want to have a pour of something and you don't want to dial it up all the way to 120 plus proof. That's what this is for. And you don't have to dilute it. It's just right there, kind of at the perfect level for you. That's why these kinds of products exist. And so, let's appreciate them for the role that they're filling. And I think this one does it really well.
Let's use that as a segue to just sample just for enjoyment and see how this compares to a 95 proof or Old Forester product, the Statesman. This is 1% higher, two proof points higher. Old Forester, they say, comes from the barrels pulled from the hottest part of the rick houses. So it's a similar, I assume, a similar aged product. I think identical mash bill. It doesn't have that secondary barreling. It's a different blend. But let's take a look at it and see how it might compare.
And interestingly, I mean, it's 1% alcohol by volume difference. On the nose, immediately you pick up so much more ethanol on this. In addition, I would say that this is younger in terms of total time spent in oak. However, the sharp oak influence you get here, and by sharp I mean where it's just more kind of pointed and out of balance. It's not oak complemented by something else. That's there as well. And so where the oak is standing out in a product that's actually a little bit younger, it's usually going to be out of balance in some way. And this does present that. So it's not like oak with a lot of vanilla or oak with a lot of caramel. It's really just kind of that sharp oak that you get with the ethanol right up front.
It's got a good nose on it. I mean, it's a lot of the traditional bourbon notes, the caramels, the vanillas you kind of talked about. Um, there's a little bit of fruitiness, a little bit of cherry there. You're right. There is definitely more ethanol there. My overall comment on the nose is this feels like a higher proof bourbon that has been watered down. It's got kind of a diluted feeling to the nose that's kind of put the flavors a little bit out of whack.
On this one, I haven't gotten really that kind of banana, uh, Old Forester Hallmark banana note yet, but I have gotten a lot of metal and white sugar.
Yeah, it's a good nose. Something I think I did score fairly high and would again. But putting next to the other, I think 1910 did a really good job.
This on the palate, one of the first things you get is kind of a little bit of that stinging white sugar taste, and with the burn along with it, which is really more that ethanol.
There's some kind of vanilla custard maybe to the palate on this. Some caramel flavors, not the depth of flavor that you were getting with the 1910. Fairly creamy, enjoyable. Um, doesn't lead to much of a finish though.
Yeah, the finish here is because the texture overall is more oily than the 1910. It's not quite as drying, and so in some ways you feel like you get a little bit longer finish, um, but it's simpler. There's not as much going on.
And this is a good product. I think I like it more and more as I drink it. I think the first time I had it, I was a little taken aback by it. I'm not sure why, but I sat down with it and I've enjoyed it more and more ever since. I think it's a solid product. From a score perspective, I know we're not going to score it. It doesn't fall far off of where we put 1910. I think generally, I think it's a good product. Maybe I wouldn't rate the value quite as high on this one as I would the 1910.
Because they're basically priced at the same, right?
Right.
And I think really my impression of this, from the nose through the finish and then overall, is it's a little bit more than half a step down from the 1910. I'm not a fan of some of that stinging white sugar flavor, and then also some of the simplicity to this. It doesn't reach out and grab me really. In some ways I feel like if I want to sign up for this kind of experience, I'll do it by just buying a bottle of Henry McKenna Bottle and Bond or Buffalo Trace. If I just want a classic bourbon profile, that's even a little bit better than this, and both of those are half the cost.
Yeah. This starts going a little bit downhill with a kind of you said sharp white sugar. I'm also kind of getting a metallic note on the kind of the palate and the finish that's just a little bit off-putting on this.
Yeah. Are you getting the banana anywhere? I'm starting to a little bit on the back end of the palate is where it first kind of emerges for me.
I said vanilla pudding earlier. There is I could kind of see a kind of a banana custard along with that vanilla pudding flavor in there. It's again, we talked earlier about it's not the banana bread. To me, it's not like a fresh banana or an overripe banana. To me, it's more of that kind of custardy pie filling kind of note.
I almost get like on the finish, like if I were to bite into a frozen banana, where there's still some of the flavor there, but it's like been crystallized and frozen and muted in some way. I don't know. I felt like I got a lot more of the banana flavor in a way that I liked it from that 1897 small batch, and then also the bottle and bond.
Now, do you still have some 1910 left? I mean, this review is really all about 1910, and the purpose of bringing in the statesman here is just to give it a little perspective. You come back to this nose on the 1910, and I think it really highlights just how of a different profile this really is.
It's funny. I go back to the nose on the 1910, and I almost get like I mean, this is taking me by surprise, almost like a savory, like umami kind of scent to the nose. You know what I mean?
Yeah. What I came back and what I was getting is I feel like I'm getting almost like a wine finish on the nose.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you're talking about like a red wine.
Yeah.
Finish there. That surprised me.
Solid pour. I'm really enjoying this 1910. I probably have enough in my bottle to make it through until next June or whenever that they say it's going to come back out. I know you're a little skeptical of that story, and probably we all should be with the tales that float around in the bourbon world. But I do think that this was received very well in the marketplace, and maybe more so than they anticipated. I could see sales on this being a lot higher than they anticipated, and if they didn't plan well enough ahead, I could see it being gone for a while. It's a good product. I will be glad to see it come back as a regular product come June next year.
So one of the things you said, I think, when you initially got this bottle, which as of today, December 27th, is still around town here at a few places, is you said, and now that it's gotten enough airtime for me, and I can see what you were saying. What you told me was, I think the nose on this could fool some people, and they could think that this is, a dusty bourbon, something that was bottled, decades ago, but recently opened. Now that it's really sat with some time, and I'm going back and nosing it, I understand better what you're saying, which makes me then need to revise. I think I'm inching this up to a 4 on the nose. Seriously, some of these with some airtime, man, they really like need to sit for more than 10 or 15 minutes. They're the kind of the perfect thing to decant. I felt that with the 1920. I put my first bottle of 1920 about a half of the way down. I put it in my decanter, knowing that it would fill maybe half of the decanter, and over time I got like this rich plum kind of nose and palate to it that I really liked. This with some airtime takes that turn into some of those like kind of savory and red wine notes that are really, really good. And so I'm going to change my nose score to a 4.
Here's what makes me very excited about this. I think it's good. We've been having a lot of dusty bourbons lately. We just finished up with our Wild Turkey month in November, where we tasted a whole bunch of Wild Turkey products from the 1970s and 1980s. Some people say that everything old is better. Some of it is very, very good. Some of it is better. It's just different. And I have this fear that we will never get back to those same profiles that we had in the 70s, 80s, or even before. This gives me a little bit of hope that there is a way of making products that can bring back some of that old whiskey feeling. I enjoy this. I'm not, I don't know that I'm fooled into thinking that it's an older bourbon, but I think if you put it in front of me blind and told me that it was, or handed it to me and told me that it was, I'd probably believe you. And that excites me.
Yeah, I don't know that I've seen this kind of twice barreled sort of strategy done as well as this one has in the bourbon arena. Now, it's funny because Scotch does this all the time. Scotch will go from one ex-bourbon barrel to another, or switch between that and ex-sherry barrels. But with bourbon, it doesn't seem like it's really been done in a way where someone can say, man, this was really well executed. Unless I'm missing something, this might have been one of the better executions of that sort of strategy.
I think there's some good barrel finished bourbons out there that follow the more traditional Scotch path of let's put it into a 25-year-old sherry barrel and bring some of that richness to it. But I think the problem in the bourbon industry, I'll hold up another one that I bought recently that we're going to get to a review soon, the Knob Creek Twice Barreled Rye. Foreshadow that my review on that is not going to be nearly what this is. They're putting something back into a new charred oak barrel. It's almost starting the process all over, when what you really want on a bourbon is to age it long enough to get rid of some of those new barrel notes and pull out some of those really rich old notes that come from inside the barrel. Why do we do this? Why do we put it back into something brand new? I think there's better ways of doing it. Maybe charring it for 55 seconds in Brown-Forman terms, which may or may not be different than what Buffalo Trace. Maybe that's the magic. I don't know. But this seems to be better done than anything else. I like it a lot better than Woodford, that's for sure. The Woodford Double Oaked, whatever it's called.
Yeah, and I think that they put it into something that's been a new oak container, so that they can continue to say that it's bourbon, to meet the technical definition of it. But this does it better than to mind any other bourbon that I've had. There are very good bourbon finished, whiskey finished products that I've had. This one of doing the double barreled thing, of putting it in another barrel that's new, so it can still be called bourbon at the end of the day. It works, man.
Any other parting thoughts on either one of these, the 1910 or the Statesman or the Whiskey Row series?
Well, has Brown-Forman really come out and said for sure that this is the grand finale? This is the end of the Whiskey Row series?
So Jackie, when she was on Bourbon Pursuit, did say that this is the last of the releases. She did hold open the possibility that there could be someday that they retire one of these and replace it with another product on a national scale. I think she's just kind of hedging at that point. But they are apparently done with the series at 4. I think they've got some other innovative products in mind, but I think they've exhausted, what they wanted to do with this series. Why? My guess is they're running out of important dates. And as you start getting closer and closer to time, if you threw, 2003 on a bottle because that was some important date, you're going to really confuse people that is whiskey from 2003. I don't think anyone really thinks that this is whiskey from 1910, so they can get away with this stuff. And I think it's kind of run its course, and you'll see some other innovative things, but it'll be under a different label.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess we'll see what Old Forester has in store.
All right. Make sure you check out the full review of Old Forester 1910 at flightclubict.com. And we've got hundreds of other reviews on there, including those from the Whiskey Row series. They're all under the Brown-Forman Distillery page if you want to look at different Old Forester products. So I invite you over to our site, check it out, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, Stephen.
Yeah, thank you. And if you got any samples of other products you'd like us to try, Old Forester, Brown-Forman, or otherwise, send it our way and let us know what you want us to try and review, and we'll do our best.
President's Choice.
That's right, especially the old President's Choice bottles.
All right, signing off, guys. Thank you.